In a day and age when even recreational exercisers and weekend warriors are told to cut down on their fuel intake and to eat less, what would happen if you ate more? And if you're currently underfueling your activity, where do you even begin to make change? This is an epic 2-part podcast that I'm doing with a very special guest. I cannot wait for you to dive in, get answers to these questions, and more. The Listen to Your Body podcast is all about helping women who lift weights get stronger, fuel themselves without counting every bite of food, perform better in and out of the gym, and take up space. I'm strength coach, nutritional therapy practitioner, and certified intuitive eating counselor, Steph Gaudreau. This weekly show brings you discussion about building strength without obsessing about food and exercise, lifting weights, food psychology, and more. You'll learn how to eat, train, recover, listen to your body, and step into your strength. Hit subscribe on your favorite podcast app, and let's dive in. What's up, my friend? Thanks so much for listening into the podcast this week, because in the immortal words of Samuel L. Jackson from the blockbuster movie Jurassic Park, hold on to your butts, because we are about to dive into some stuff about fueling your workouts, whether you're an endurance athlete or a strength athlete, whether you are a recreational exerciser who loves being active, or you are a competitive weekend warrior. We're going to have something for everybody on these 2 shows. So yes, we have split this podcast up into 2 parts because it was just too epic to cut anything away. And so today on the show, I'm very proud to welcome back my good friend and colleague, Jamie Scott of Athletica Nutrition. Jamie and I have been friends for many years. He's been on the podcast before. And today we are really diving into an area that both of us are super passionate about, and that is helping people who are athletic and who are performing at different levels, whether it's you're competing in sports or not. We're really interested in helping you make sure you're getting enough energy. And we're going to be diving into some of these topics on part 1. Specifically on this episode, we're going to do things like define what is an athlete. How do you know if you're an athlete, or if you should really be concerned about how much you're fueling your physical activity? We're going to be talking about low energy availability. What is it? What are some of the consequences? Why calories in, calories out is often an oversimplified model to use when we're talking about fueling, and a concept called energy flux. And I'm not going to give away too much about that because I really need you to tune in and hear the full discussion about what we're going to talk about there. So this is such a meaty episode. Yes, it's going to be in 2 parts. We're going to release part 2 next week. So we're going to keep you dangling with a little bit of a cliffhanger. You can thank Netflix for popularizing that, of course, to get you to tune into the next one. But I hope that you're going to find that these episodes are really useful. In part 2, we're going to be talking about more of the practical sense of how we start shifting around some of the energy in your day. What happens if you're not eating enough? How do you deal with that? And also, yes, we are tackling the big elephant in the room about fasting, and that's all coming in part 2. Before we dive into this episode with Jamie, however, make sure that if you are interested in getting support in a group format for your fueling, if you're lifting weights, you're trying to get stronger and build muscle, have more energy, and perform better in and out of the gym, go ahead and join the waitlist for Strength Nutrition Unlocked. That's my group coaching program. It is going to be opening up in the early fall, and I want to be able to send you more updates about that. So you can go ahead and pop your name on the waitlist at stephgaudreau.com/link, stephgaudreau.com/link. All right, let's go ahead and get into this episode. Ooh, it's going to be such a good one with Jamie Scott, all about energy intake. Jamie, welcome back to the podcast.
Back, kia ora.
Kia ora.
It's been a hot minute.
It has been a hot minute since you've been on the podcast. I did go back and look, when was that? And it was 2017.
Has there much happened since 2017? What's going on in the world? Anything much since then?
Just a couple things.
Yeah.
And ironically, we talked about muscle because, shockingly, here we are, many years later, still going on about the same thing. And funny enough, sometimes I'll look back in my Instagram or Facebook kind of memories and on this day, what happened. And recently, from 7 years ago, I came across the talk that you did at an event in the States, and it was all about muscle. And I was like, here we are. This is,
What is a guy with a degree in background in sport and exercise science doing talking about muscles all the time? I don't know.
Well, it's interesting because I feel like until relatively recently, it was still the big, huge focus of, I don't know, I guess you could call it the popular discourse about things like fitness or nutrition was all about body fat. And for many years, you've been going on and on about the importance of muscle. And I think there's been a bit of a renaissance, but I think things are changing. I don't know what you think, but I think there's still a long way to go.
Oh, it's a huge way to go. I think it's one of those concepts that if as much as it feels like there's a change in the era or a bit of a renaissance, I'm always kind of conscious of the fact that that's just in our own little bubble. And that the moment you step outside of that bubble, there's not as much of a change as what you think or hope there is.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sometimes a bit of a rude awakening when you do step outside the bubble. But nevertheless, I'm glad to have you back on the show today.
I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, just for some background, if people, haven't heard that show or have heard of you and what you do. And we've been friends for many, many years now. We've had the great pleasure of attending some of the events that you put on in New Zealand and speaking and being there. And we're personal friends. And you're just somebody that I really admire in this space in terms of somebody who's always looking to bring really quality evidence-based information to people who are active and athletic and trying to get the most out of their training. And so I hope that this conversation is really useful for people. And I'm sure that will be helped by the rapport that we have as friends, but I also really admire you as a colleague. And as somebody who, just jokingly, I always tell my husband is like that some of the things that people are like, ooh, this new thing I've discovered. And it's like, oh, I think Jamie was talking about that like 15 years ago. So,
well, yeah, I think we need to put a bit of context around that. Like, I mean, throughout our friendship, there's been this kind of running joke that this new stuff is stuff that I've been speaking about for however long, depending on what it is, at least 10, if not 20 odd years. Mm-hmm. But one that's a reflection of the fact that I'm old, been around a little bit longer than some of the people who are talking about this sort of stuff. But also too, like, story, like everything goes in cycles. And I think like I've been in my career long enough now, like, I mean, to give the listeners some context, I completed my sports science and nutrition degrees in postgrads the end of the 1990s. So I was effectively kind of throughout the 1990s a university student. So my kind of experience and history and everything kind of comes from that period of time. I've been around long enough to kind of see some of the things that were on the table then disappear, but now kind of come back again. Things go kind of full circle. Stories kind of get retold. And it's just funny when you get to an age and a stage in life and your career when, you kids on the block, whether they're kind of actual kids or kind of metaphorical kids, are talking about sleep and sun exposure and this, that, and the next thing. We're like, okay, cool, we're back to this topic again, are we? So
yeah.
There's nothing new in the world. Nothing new. There are the stories retold, but there's very little that's new.
That's so true. So today on the show, we're going to talk about, I think, and we'll see where it goes, a couple things about energy. I know you're somebody who's really vocal about this with your clients and on social media and in the broader context of education for people who are active, perhaps competing in sport. And this kind of push-pull that we often see where, to put it bluntly, people are told, especially in endurance type pursuits, that, the smaller and lighter you are, the better. And so you should just get as lean as possible. And then the wheels kind of fall off the wagon. So I don't know if it makes sense to start talking about that, and we can maybe segue into some other things.
I'm sure you and I both know that we'll end up off on a tangent a million miles away from where we started out. So
it's okay. Yeah. So I think one of the things that really I appreciated is that you have been sharing, and especially over the last month or two, a lot of stories on Instagram about stories coming out of the Olympics, in particular with female athletes in the Olympics. Can you tell us about some of those stories that you were sharing?
Yeah, it was really interesting that, obviously, like having the recent Olympics creates a bit of a focal point for looking exactly what successful athletes do and, conversely unsuccessful athletes are doing. There's been a bit of an expose here in a particular media outlet in New Zealand looking at female athletes. Again, I guess for context is that the focus on female athletes is enjoying a bit of a time in the spotlight, not before time, I might add. And so there's a lot of interest around that sort of topic. And so there was, in this expose, there was, I think, maybe 5 or 6 different athletes ranging from the New Zealand female rowing team, which had great success at the Olympics, lots of gold medals there, through to rowers who didn't make the squad because they burnt out, sailors who didn't make the Olympic team because they burnt out, cyclists, mountain bikers, a very wide range. But the common thread throughout was that a lot of these female athletes who had gone to a pretty kind of deep, dark spot trying to achieve what you said in your intro there of achieving both performance, weight goals, aesthetics, all in one hit through what you can now kind of look back on as a really low energy intake. And it just blew them smithereens. Some have managed it a little bit better than others. Some of the athletes that were featured in this series were athletes who had to basically retire from the sport. So much so was the damage, both kind of physically, mentally, and emotionally, of hitting kind of rock bottom through insufficient fueling. But also at the other end was the success of athletes who had kind of plumbed those depths, I guess, but had managed to kind of come back and were now raging successes, with the pinnacle being probably, again, the elite female rowing team. And, keep in mind, too, that rowing is a sport that has weight classes. And so to have a sport where you've got a weight class, these athletes who are now not focusing and have kind of wraparound support and such, that they're no longer focusing so much on the weight, but on just their absolute horsepower and energy and recovery, and the success that it brought them. And they were still able to maintain the weight without kind of doing some of the drastic stuff that is kind of well known in weight-based sports. And I think, one of the real standout things for the female rowers was these were athletic females in, I think, probably in the 60-something weight class, probably around the 65, I think, 65 kg. And they were putting away 5,000 calories a day, which, if anyone tries to eat 5,000 calories a day and sustain it day after day, that's hard work in and of itself. That's an Olympic medal just to eat that amount of food.
Yeah, that's dedication right there.
Yeah. So it was a really kind of interesting series, and it kind of brought to the fore a lot of the things that I have been talking about for a while, both in terms of just kind of my ongoing review of the literature, which I have to do as part of my professional development, but also what I know both you and I see in practice when we are working with individuals, and that is this growing issue around low energy availability or inappropriate eating. Just like, in a nutshell, people are just not eating enough for what they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's becoming more prevalent. And I think the outcomes of that, I kind of get the impression that they're getting a little bit worse than what they have been historically. Maybe we've got our eyes on it a little bit more and are seeing more of it.
Mm-hmm.
But so like it was a good kind of focal point of the Olympics and some of the outcomes there and some of the successes and failures of certain athletes to bring what I have been discussing into a bit more focus and making it a bit more real for people, I think. So.
Yeah. There was there was a story from a heptathlete here in the States as well that came out around the same time, same exact scenario. And you would think, we look up to these athletes, or we look to them and we think, gosh, they're elite athletes. They know their bodies really intimately. They're really used to pushing themselves to levels that, every time I watch an Olympic event, I think there's no fucking way I could ever be at that level. It's beautiful to watch, right? They're performing at such a high level. And yet to have to hear the realization, to hear the acknowledgement of, hey, I didn't know, and / maybe I had pressure from coaches, or maybe I just thought it was expected of me, or these are some of the habits that I had from before. I just was really unaware of how much fuel, how much energy my body really needed. Mm. And I felt like shit. And then I would kind of blame myself for not being dedicated enough, not trying hard enough. And it seems like this really vicious cycle. And you were talking about, this is coming to the awareness a lot more. Do you think that it's a combination of, the sort of Instagram, social media culture of comparisons and desire to be smaller and thinner or leaner? Do you think it's poor coaching and lack of coaching knowledge and education, or lack of nutrition education in terms of evidence-based practices and things that really are necessary? Do you feel like it's just pressure to look a certain way, or a combination of those things?
Could I go D, all of the above?
Yeah, or D, all of the above, for sure.
Yeah. No, it's like this is why it's so complicated to deal with, because it's multifactorial. There are all of those things involved. I think, stepping back a little bit, we've started this conversation looking at elite athletes. I am fortunate in my practice that I do work with a very small number of elite athletes, but I predominantly work with the weekend warriors, those who are just doing a little bit of fitness for their own personal development. And so I get to see the full spectrum. There's no difference. So I think we kind of need to clear that up straight away. It's like, elite athletes are not a special breed of human. They're just a human. Mm-hmm. And they have all of the same fears and doubts and concerns, and maybe a little bit more pressure in that the thing that they're doing, their elite athleticism, they've turned into a career, but that's a very precarious career. Like, they are on a knife edge, and there's very, very few athletic endeavors where if you stop performing, that system is going to kind of nurture you and stay with you. Like, if you no longer perform, if you no longer are up to standard, if you're no longer of gold medal potential, you get dropped like a hot rock. Mm. And so there's that constant fear of, what am I going to do if I can't go as fast as the competitors? What am I going to do if I get injured? What am I going to do? Blah, blah, blah. So, and I think too, like, there are different levels of support across sports, and it varies between nations. And I know from the New Zealand perspective that there are a handful of sports that get a lot of government funding, that have a kind of a good structure built around them. Kiwis are renowned for doing well in sports where they sit down, so it's generally like sailing, cycling, rowing, anything to do with water and bikes, we're generally probably okay at. Maybe rugby as well. So like those sports get a high level of support, but the moment you kind of step outside of, you know, a small handful of top tier sports, that support and funding and, you know, wraparound coaching and everything else drops away really, really sharply. And so there will be many, many athletes who perform at a really high level in my country and in your country who are effectively lone wolves. They're trying to figure it out by themselves and are looking in the same places that your average everyday CrossFitter will look into for information / misinformation, all of those sorts of things. So that, like, we need to be really careful that we don't kind of think elite athletes have got everything there handed to them. They don't always have a nutritionist. They don't always have good understanding coaches. And what you see at that elite level is exactly the same as what you see at sub-elite levels, at weekend warrior levels, at fitness enthusiast levels, for all of those reasons that you outlined, is that they might not have good access to information. They are on Instagram as much as anyone else, if not more, because a lot of those elite athletes will have in their contract that they have to be really visible on social media. So they're seeing what other races do. They're seeing the results they get. They, like, I know in the sport that you used to be an elite athlete in, and one that I'm very passionate about and do a bit of coaching in, which is mountain biking. Because of the way contracts run and professional teams want social media eyes on everything, there's pressure to not only kind of feature yourself as an athlete doing your athletic things, but feature yourself as, oh, look at me, here I am in a bikini sitting on the edge of a lake in between races. And so there is that kind of like culture around, what is your body composition? What do you look like? Like, are you prepared to, like, if you need to get your clothes off to get social media hits, have you got a body that looks the part? You know, so there's all of that pressure. It's just so messy, and trying to get this kind of ball of wool of a human being and find where the end is and pull a thread is hard.
It's very challenging. One of the things I was going to ask you about as the conversation progresses is, one of the things that I know in my community people struggle with, in my clients people struggle with, is this concept of, well, I might, you know, be a recreational exerciser. Maybe I do some local competitions for fun, but I don't consider myself to be an athlete or somebody who's working out to the degree that I need to pay attention to fueling, that I need to pay attention to my nutrition or my recovery, that I'm just not doing enough to qualify. And I'm wondering if you can kind of talk through how you see that, or how you define that, or some of the parameters you think people should maybe pay attention to say, hey, you know,
I mean,
this stuff matters.
Bluntly, I'll call bullshit on that, because there's, like, I know you've seen it, and I definitely see it too. Like, there are like people who are fitness enthusiasts who are doing more than elite athletes do. And they might go, well, I don't really compete and I'm just doing it for a bit of fun and whatever else. But we've seen one of the big things that I've kind of seen over the last decade is this, I don't know, what do you call it? Say a democratization of training, nutrition, tracking, equipment, like the whole lot. Stuff that used to be tucked away and was the domain of just elite athletes. You and I can go and buy off the shelf. Like, if you want to go and buy the exact same shoes that Kipchoge uses to run a 2-hour marathon in, you can walk down to your local shoe shop and do that. There's no difference. Mountain biking, I can go and buy the exact same equipment that the absolute elites use. And there might, like, sometimes there might be a new thing being trialed, but that trickles down really, really quickly. We used to spend so much time. I was involved in elite track cycling back in the mid-2000s. And, you know, mid-2000s was also a time when, you know, yes, there was an internet back then, but it was all kind of chat rooms and whatever else. It wasn't kind of social media in the same way that there is now.
Yeah.
And it was always a big game to try and figure out what elite athletes were doing. Like, what are the British doing? What are the Aussies doing? Now, like, you can just get access to that information all of the time. Like, in this information age, there's very little that gets held back, like in terms of the big central pillar stuff, which then means that your average weekend warrior is looking at these elites and going, well, I'm going to get myself a nutritionist and I'm going to get myself a coach. Like, I'm now pretty much a full-time coach by virtue of the fact that your average weekend warrior now has a coach. They now have a sports nutritionist. They can go out and buy this, they can buy that. They're dedicating 10, 12, 15, sometimes in crazy amounts, 20 hours a week to their training, which is exactly what the elite athletes do. So again, there's just not that difference. And so you just come back and go, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, then it's a duck. So like if you've got the energy expenditure, you're doing stuff that is so close to being what we call elite anyway, then you require that fueling. If you're doing 6 days a week of training, then it requires fueling. If you're, dedicating a certain amount of time, if you've then also got a job and a family and everything else on top of that, you need to be careful that you don't just partition the training side of it and go, well, I'm not doing as much on my training as, say, an elite cyclist might be doing. But but the elite cyclist doesn't have a family and a full-time job and whatever else. So they get to park their feet up on the couch and play PlayStation when you then have to go to work and cook and clean and shop and do all the other stuff. So there's just not the big differences that people try and make out. And I kind of get the impression that, some of that is just ignorance and a lack of awareness and understanding of exactly what elite athletes do. But some of it is also almost like a conscious way of going, I'm not going to fuel myself up to the level that I know I need to because there's another driver to it, be it kind of weight, body composition, whatever they're after. So,
yeah, I appreciate those distinctions and completely. I came from the cycling world as well before I was lifting weights. And I remember a very good friend of mine was training to be a pro mountain biker, except she had a commute and, work and responsibilities and a spouse and, a lot of things that some of her counterparts who did that it was like literally what they did full time, had more time, didn't have the same amount of jockeying responsibilities. And I'm not saying maybe it was easier for them to do things like eat appropriately, but that's some of the things that my clients really struggle with is, how do I actually find the time, space, et cetera, to eat my regular meals? We don't think that would be a challenge, but for a lot of people that is because of all their other responsibilities that they're dealing with.
Oh, and I think it's more of a challenge in modern society now because I think if you look at people's lives structurally, they're jammed so tight. There's just so many things that people have going on, and part of it is just accessibility. Like we now have access to doing this, that, and the next thing. There's that social comparison of, if someone else is a mother who holds down a full-time job, but they're also training full-time for some sort of endurance type sport, then they kind of get held up as some sort of icon. And then you also have to do that as well. So there's a lot of things that drive people to really jam their lives together. And there is no space and there's no gaps in between a lot of the times. And that's really frustrating when people do eventually kind of come to someone like me and go, look, I'm doing a million things and I'm running out of energy and I feel such deep fatigue. And I'm like, okay, cool. Well, we need to fuel some of this a little bit better. And that is going to require some prep, some planning, some shopping, like sitting down and actually taking time and chilling out. And they're like, I can't do that. Like there's no space. It's like, you're going to have to drop something. No, I can't do that because dropping something means I'm failing. It's like, so I often liken it. I don't know if you recall. Remember the puzzles that used to be around, where it was like a square with an image that's been kind of spliced down into, I don't know, like 9 different tiles, and you would solve the puzzle by moving a tile around, and you kind of chase this tile around. Eventually, like, you get there. Well, that puzzle only works because there's a space. Like, there's a free space where you drop something in and you can move stuff. I liken people's lives now to that space being taken away. And you come in, and I'm coming in, and I'm trying to solve the puzzle of their energy levels and their fatigue and everything else. But there's no space to move stuff around. Like, their weeks are jam-packed, absolutely jam-packed.
Yep. I love that analogy. I'm going to borrow it, of course, and credit you for it. But I like that for, we can talk about this sort of the research, and we can talk about the best practices and the skills and that all day. But at the end of the day too, I know you know this, so I'm preaching to the choir, but this is for people listening. As a coach, one of the things we do besides sharing, good quality information is help people to figure those things out. And sometimes it's not an information problem. Once we get past that point, it's an implementation issue. And so then you have to take a hard look at some of that stuff. So I would love if we can talk a little bit more about, we've mentioned it a couple of times already, but this concept of low energy availability or reduced energy availability. What does that really mean? If somebody's never heard that before, I've mentioned it a couple of times on the podcast, but if somebody's not heard about that, like, what does it mean on a practical level?
Yeah. Okay. So if we talk about energy availability, so what is that? It's like, it is what it says on the tin. It's like, how much energy is in your system available to run all of the various things that your bodily system needs to do. It's knowing that we were going to record this, I've been kind of like playing around in my head with what's a good analogy. And these days I always use phones because they're ubiquitous. Everyone has one. So our energy availability is the equivalent of the charge that's left on your phone. So if you go and have a look at your phone and it says that there is 80% left on it, that's the energy availability. You've got 80% of the capacity of that battery available to run the functions of that phone. I also, like, historically, using that analogy too, I've always kind of mentioned to the audiences when I've done talks that we tend to care more about how much energy is left available on our phones than how much energy is left available in our cells. And everyone has a different threshold. It's like, oh my God, like my phone's down to 50%, where's my charger? And yet we're quite happy to run our bodies almost down to kind of that 5% like warning, and still not kind of think that maybe we need to plug ourselves in to recharge whatever that kind of that looks like across multiple kind of functions. So the energy availability is really like, what have you got to run your systems? I think people get really wrapped up in the physical activity side of it without really giving good acknowledgement and recognition to the fact that everything else requires energy too. It's not just, you don't just need energy for skeletal muscle contraction, whether you're walking, lifting, riding a bike, whatever, running, jumping, climbing trees type of thing. You need, your brain requires energy, your gut requires energy, your immune system requires energy, your growth and repair requires energy. Like, there's not a system in your body, there's not a single cell in your body that does not require energy to go about its processes. The thing that we're seeing more of, and this is where kind of the low energy availability side of it comes in, is people are prioritizing the energy that they have available for exercise-based activity. And then they're not leaving enough left over for all of these other functions, which means that when there's insufficient energy for the other functions to occur, you get dysfunction. Like those functions cannot occur at the rate or level that they need to occur. And so each one of those tissues or systems, you'll see some sort of dysfunction or breakdown. And that will manifest in a number of ways. Again, if we use something that people are familiar with, which is muscle contraction and exercise, what happens when you run out of energy trying to undertake some sort of muscular type contraction? If you're going for a run and your energy and the energy that you have available to fuel that running is reduced, low, non-existent, you can't run anymore. You do this thing called you hit the wall. And no matter how hard you try, you cannot get back up to the pace and sustain it. To the point, maybe that your muscles start cramping or you tear a muscle or whatever it happens to be. So you see dysfunction in there. So when there's no longer enough energy in the system to power the entire system, the body is forced to either take things offline effectively. And again, going back to that cell phone analogy, you know that if you run your phone down to a sufficiently low charge, it'll go into power saving mode, which means that it will reduce the functionality. It will reduce the responsiveness, the brightness of the screen, maybe reduce some of the connectivity, all of that sort of stuff starts to happen in the background. Your body will start to kind of do the same sort of thing. So maybe your brain doesn't work as fast as what it should do. And so you feel a bit kind of slow or fatigued or brain foggy, memory starts to kind of go. Maybe your gut's not functioning the way it should do. So you go and eat a meal, and maybe the kind of meal sits a little bit heavier and doesn't agree with you, or maybe your gut's a bit kind of growly and grumbly, and all sorts of digestive function type stuff can occur all the way through. Your immune system starts to falter a little bit, so you tend to get sick a little bit more often. As an extension of that, you'll pick up injuries that don't get repaired, and so they become really niggly. Like these things that have never been a problem just start to become really persistent. For women, there's a big focus on menstrual cycle dysfunction, which is effectively, like when you look at it in a kind of broader context, you've got a brain going, there's just not enough energy in this system to support daily activities, let alone the growth and development of another human being. So we'll just knock that system offline. And so you'll see initially a loss of ovulation. So you'll start to have anovulatory cycles. And eventually that will kind of flow all the way through to amenorrhea, another menstrual cycle dysfunction, which has been a increasingly popular topic. So there's just not a system that is untouched by having this low energy availability state. The trap that people fall into, I think, is they're chasing energy intakes that are now so low. And I've recently sort of started saying that if your total daily caloric intake starts with a 1 and you're trying to be physically active, you're already doing it wrong. Like male or female, and you're trying to be physically active, you've got no business eating a daily calorie intake that starts with a 1. But that's the norm. So let's use some nice round numbers that my brain can cope with. Let's say you've decided to eat 1,500 calories of total energy a day. I know you and I are not big fans of talking about calories, but we'll use it for illustrative purposes. So you eat kind of 1,500 calories a day, but you decide that you absolutely have to do your exercise. And so you prioritize that. First thing in the morning, you drag yourself out of bed and you go and burn 500 calories doing whatever, CrossFit, running, riding bikes. Now that only leaves 1,000 calories a day left in the system to fuel everything else that the body needs to do. But in that kind of average human being, your basal metabolic rate, which is like the barest bones of energy that you need to kind of keep the lights on before doing anything else, might be 1,400 calories. And then all of the other functions start to stack in on top of that. So your body might require 1,600 calories a day just to lie in bed like a zombie and do nothing, but you've only left it 1,000. So what is the body going to do? It has to go into some sort of energy conservation, power-saving mode and start knocking systems offline. It has to make decisions. Well, you've got a few micro tears in those muscles. I can't fix them. You haven't given me enough energy. And by the way, I'll say, when we talk about energy, we're also talking a proxy for specific nutrient density. So a lot of the systems require vitamins, minerals, cofactors, like the whole lot. And if you are eating so low in terms of your total energy intake, your total nutrient density is also failing as well. So you won't be getting enough irons and zincs and certain amino acids and whatever else. I learned very recently, one of the very first systems that kind of gets knocked offline when there's insufficient energy going in is your collagen repair system, which it's the most prolific collagen building is one of the most prolific kind of protein synthesis processes in the body, but it's also one of the easiest just to kind of can for a little bit and take offline. But if you kind of follow through, well, what are the consequences of that? What does your body use collagen for? Well, repairing muscle, repairing bone, repairing skin wounds, whatever else. And so muscle tears don't get replaced. Small micro tears and micro damage in bone doesn't get repaired, and that can eventually build up to the point where you're getting weak bones, maybe stress fractures and so on. Wounds are slow to heal. Hair starts falling out and doesn't kind of look as thick and lush. And so there's just so many flow-on effects of doing that. So this is becoming such a real problem in terms of the culture and normality around these low energy diets and this misunderstanding of what it actually takes to fuel a body at rest, let alone adding additional exercise on top of that. So does that explain it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Lots of me banging my gums together. Hopefully people
I appreciate the analogies. I'm a big fan of using them. And I also appreciate the breakdown for the listeners of that importance of your body. I think we think the body is at rest or we're not doing much, and I'm using air quotes here. So therefore, we can really afford to eat the bare minimum of energy intake in the day. And we've seen the proliferation. I mean, I won't go near TikTok right now. I have clients who have told me about the shit show diet and nutrition stuff they're seeing on TikTok right now. And, the reality is that 1,200 calorie diets have not gone away. They're still prescribed and used commonly, and 1,500 calories, 800 calories. And I think there's this idea that, well, I'm not doing that much, so I don't need that much energy. Or conversely, what I hear a lot is, well, I want to lose weight and I have all this stored energy on my body, so can't I just use that?
Well, and this is where, I park a good portion of the blame, and I might out myself and make myself pretty unpopular with some of your audience. I park a good portion of the blame on my profession. But when I say my profession, I'm talking both probably the nutrition side of things, nutrition dietetic side of it, and the exercise physiology side of it. Because in our desire to keep things as simple as possible, and almost like treating people like they're a little bit like they're stupid. So we've kind of dumbed the whole energy balance thing down to a blunt calories in, calories out. And that reduces the body down to almost like a spreadsheet. And people can go, well, at the end of a 24-hour period, I've only burned this number of calories. And we've got tracking apps left, right, and center now, and they'll go, I can see I'm only burning 1,600 calories a day, so I don't need to be eating more than that. And if I want to reduce my body fat, everyone keeps telling me I need a calorie deficit. So if my energy expenditure is 1,600 calories a day, then I probably should only be eating 1,200 calories a day to create this energy deficit to burn fat. But that's not how our bodies function at all. And people can kind of fall into a little bit of a trap. And this is the thing that I see classically is if you're running the system on low energy, the body will initially try and compensate quite a bit. So yes, you're still expending energy in terms of your conscious exercise activity that you're engaged in. You're still going to your CrossFit classes, your spin classes, you're still doing this, that, and the next thing. But there are other layers to that energy expenditure where your body's trying to compensate and not see itself fall into starvation. The biggest one of those becomes what we call your non-exercise activity. And so, I see this classically is people will be active in terms of the exercise activity, but they're very inactive in terms of their non-exercise activity, which is like, it's all of the little stuff in between. It's like if you need to walk down the shops to get something, you're like, no, I can't be bothered. Or I'm just going to sit on the couch. I'm just going to do this. I'm not really going to move. And so you'll see that side of things start to fall away really, really quickly. I always saw it in the early days of my career. I always saw it classically with the bodybuilders getting ready for competition because, I don't know, 4 weeks out from a competition when they're just absolutely starved out of their brains, they would still come in and do their morning cardio, but they would barely move the rest of the day. Like they were just zombies. So they were just like, their bodies are trying to conserve energy really hard.
Mm-hmm.
And we frame that, like, I think, in terms of how we judge ourselves, we just go, oh, I'm just feeling lazy. I can't be bothered. And so it's just something that we kind of do and accept, but we reduce that non-exercise activity. Our basal metabolic rates or resting metabolic rates, they decrease quite sharply too. And that's potentially one of the biggest shifts. So instead of your body's because your body's taking all these systems offline and reducing its input into those systems, then that basal metabolic rate, the energy cost of just keeping you on standby reduces quite sharply. Again, in the same way that if you put your phone into power saving mode, the battery lasts so much longer, but the functionality is significantly decreased. And then a lot of the food that we're eating, food, you have what's called the thermic effect of food. So when you go and eat, say, high protein meals, the energy that it takes to digest that meal is really, really high. And so you have this thermic effect, this heat build-up effect that is energy burning to digest and break down and extract the nutrients out of those foods. Most people would have experienced this if they go and have I think they call it the meat sweats, but if they go and have like a high protein meal and like you're stripping your clothes off left, right, and center going, oh, it's so bloody hot. So protein is the highest in that regard. Carbohydrate would be the next highest. Fat is the lowest. Fibrous, low energy density fruits and vegetables are also pretty low as well. But what do we see people doing? It's like, well, they're either they're often restricting protein if they're on plant-based diets. They're certainly like restricting carbohydrate. A lot of people are trying to fill themselves up on fluffy salads. And so they're just no longer getting this kind of thermic effect of the food as well. So when you then look at your spreadsheet, whatever thing that's telling you how many calories you burnt at the end of the day, yeah, it looks really low.
Mm-hmm.
But we've kind of got it backwards. It's like your energy expenditure is low because your energy intake is low.
Mm-hmm.
It's not your energy intake needs to be low because your energy expenditure needs to be low. And this is a concept called energy flux. And it's a concept that, again, like I'm just not seeing that many people talk about. And I've only seen one person talk about it very, very recently. And so energy flux is just basically like, what is the balance between your energy intake and your energy expenditure? So if you've got what's called a low energy flux, it means that you've got low energy coming in, but your total low energy going out, total energy going out is also really low. So the amount of energy that is passing through the system is really, really low. Conversely, you can have a high energy flux, which is you eat a lot, but you expend a lot. And I think both you and I have probably a little bit independently, but we have kind of shared some of our thoughts on that, is that we've both noticed potentially in the last few years is that our energy intake has been kind of slipping. Mm-hmm. I think partly because of the types of foods that we eat a a lot of high satiety foods. We've always maintained a relatively good protein intake, and so that will blunt someone's appetite. You go, well, I don't really feel like I need any food. I'm not hungry. I'm getting by. But then you actually start to look at it and go, I'm probably still not eating really that much to fuel. I'm starting to slip into what, not necessarily a low energy state, but maybe at least a reduced energy state. And so when you flip that on its head and go, well, what's going to happen if I go out of my way to eat more food?
Okay, do you have the meat sweats after this episode? There was so much that we talked about, and that's just scratching the surface because the next episode is going even deeper on some of these topics. So definitely go ahead and follow Jamie on socials between now and that episode coming out if you want more information and you want to dive more into his world. And of course, you can get those links at the show notes, which are on stephgaudreau.com. While you're there, pop your name on the wait list for Strength Nutrition Unlocked, my group program opening later this fall, or you can just go directly to the link, stephgaudreau.com/link. We made it super easy for you. All right, stay tuned for part 2 next week. Yes, we kept you on a cliffhanger because we love you, and that's just what we want to do to keep you engaged in tuning in next week. I hope this was super informational. If you loved it, there's a couple things you can do. First, push that subscribe button on your podcast app. Second, share this episode out in your Instagram stories and tag both of us, Athletica Nutrition, of course, for Jamie, and myself, Steph Gaudreau, on Instagram stories. And we would just love to hear what you think. All right, we'll catch you next week for part 2. Until then, stay strong.